Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Women Soldiers of the Faith Ministries, or WSFM. I just wanted to introduce myself as Savannah Lane Hoover. My original name is Savannah Milton, but I was adopted and I took the name of Savannah Milton Lane. But then I got married to my husband over not too long ago. So now I'm Savannah Hoover. Like I said, I wanted to share my testimony, or if I didn't say that, I wanted to share my testimony from since I was born, my childhood to my teen years, young adult years, and adult years. And forgive me if I bounce around because I don't really have my notes with me. But I have about 15 minutes because these has to do with my this channel. For some reason I can only do 15-minute videos. So when I was a little baby, my parents had met in a rehab center. They were not married. They started dating. They engaged in fornication, and I was a product of that. My mother, she professed Christ, belief in Christ. I don't really know much about her because she, but we'll get into that. So did my father, but I'm not quite sure about their lifestyles. But since my mother was a crack addict, and she also abused drugs and alcohol, cigarettes. I'm not quite sure if she abused them while she was pregnant with me, but I do know she smoked. I know that she drank. Both of my parents had mental illness, so that was something I inherited. Also, there was a lot of witchcraft and certain curses on my family that kind of went down the bloodline. My mother was Caucasian, my father was African American and Native American. My mother's side of the family was from Italy and England. My grandmother was Italian. My grandfather was English, and he was from Louisiana. My mother was unwed when she found pregnant with me. So I was kind of born a little prematurely, which is why I'm so tiny. And I was born at 4 pounds 11 ounces. I was born at Griffin Hospital in Derby, Connecticut. I don't really know much about my life as a child, but as a baby. But I do know that different family members took care of me. My mother really couldn't take care of herself with bipolar, BPD, borderline personality disorder, and her addiction disorder, the dual diagnosis. My father also had gotten schizoaffected from smoking some synthetic weed. So I have that in my family, and he also drank and stuff. They both didn't take care of themselves. So my story is I've been through a lot of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, sexual abuse. I've just been through a lot of abuse. Even since I was born, there was abuse towards me. My childhood was pretty rough, full of trauma. My mother put pictures of Jesus, taught me about Jesus. I remember I lived in Ansonia with her because of the pain of my life and what I had gone through. I was a very bitter child. I was a very unbelieving child. Most children believe in Santa Claus. I didn't even believe in Santa Claus. I refused to believe in anything I didn't see. Basically, even as a child, I was very much of an atheist, really. I didn't really believe anything. Jesus was just a picture she put up there. We usually see children as being full of faith and a symbol of faith. I was not. I was skeptical, unforgiving, and bitter, even as a little child. And there was abuse that happened. My mother went through abuse. My mother and my father abused each other. They would fight. As a child, I had a lot of trauma. Um, my mother would go away to rehabs to get better, leave me with my grandparents, and that's where a heavy abuse. My grandmother was very harsh. She was very, she didn't like me. My grandfather was sexually abusive. He was a pedophile. So my life started off pretty hard, and I remembered it then. My parents were so violent towards each other that I remember one day I saw stitches on my mom's arm. They had gotten into a knife fight. So basically, my life has just been on my dad's side. My aunt and my family, they wanted to see me as a child after I had reported the abuse. But I was so severely abused that I stopped talking for a long time. I would not talk to social workers. I would not talk to family. I wouldn't talk to anybody. My aunt and my grandmother on my dad's side wanted to visit me, but the social worker said she wouldn't talk. So that's how bad it was. My grandmother used to, I used to be locked in basements, bathrooms. I don't need to go into details because that's not the important part. That's not really where I'm trying to get to. I don't have much time. Okay. So that's going to be part one. I'll talk about my childhood and we'll get to teen years and stuff. So this will be part one. As a child, I don't really remember what happened with my grandfather, but he was definitely a pedophile. He abused my mother, not my aunt on my mom's side. But yes, he abused my mother. She grew up with abuse, sexual abuse like molestation, rape. Basically what my mom went through because she couldn't find anyone really to take care of me. My grandparents took care of me, and pretty much what he did to her, he did to me. And they were extremely abusive. I mean, the details of my abuse are not really important because this is my testimony of what Jesus had done for me. But since I was a child, even at 5 years old, I remember I used to see witches and stuff. I had a lot of witches in my family, a lot of demons in my family, family curses. So I had huge family curses that run down the bloodline. So I went through all sorts of abuse, every form of abuse as a child, specifically sexual abuse because of my pedophile grandfather. I had a problem with rejection because I was, as you can see, my skin color is dark. And my mom was from a white, bold Italian family. And they had a problem with my father being black, so they had a problem with me being half black. I'm black, Native American, Italian, and English. That's so there was a lot of racism and stuff. They had a problem with me. My aunt on my mom's side even called my father the N-word. I mean, they really had a problem with black people. So apparently one day, I was talking to a social worker and I told her what had happened to me as a child. I didn't even know what was going on. So they took me out of that family. And so I lost my entire family that day. I remember I was taken from my mother. I remember all of that. Don't need to go into details because that's not the point, but I remember all of that. And so it was a closed adoption where, I could see my mother through supervised visits. I saw my father through supervised visits. I liked to meet with my mother, but even as a child, I was bitter towards my father. He would try to play with me. I wouldn't play with him at all. He tried to, my father didn't abuse me. My mother didn't abuse me, but the abuse was from my grandparents. Sadly, I still have some marks on my fingers and my legs, probably from the abuse. My grandparents, they smoked cigarettes, so I don't know. Sometimes it's hard to tell. But I remember I had a lot of traumatic memories, and I had anxiety as a teenager. We'll get to that. They started to come back, but I'll get to that. So, at 7 years old, I was adopted. My mother, I was with a foster home for a couple of years. I got news that my mother had passed away from a crack overdose. So, I had gone through abuse as a child, taken away from my entire family, lost my mother, and then I became a Christian at 7. What I had realized was the joy that my family had, joy and peace. Even as a child, my aunt on my dad's side had kind of some of my family had fought to find me, and my aunt was looking for me once when I was in college, but we'll get to that. My aunt on my mom's side, I guess she got over the racism, I don't know. And at 7, I went to a camp, and it was hard to forgive. I learned to forgive. We'll get into that some other time, because I only have like 4 minutes for a 15-minute video. But when I was 7, I saw joy and peace in my family, and that was something I didn't have even as a child. I certainly could get very hyper. I certainly could get very excited and happy, but it wasn't joy. They had a peace and a joy and during their storms, so that was the difference I saw in my new Christian family. My mother had always prayed for our family to take me to church and teach me about Jesus. And at first, I pretty much thought it was her religion. Like I said, as a child, I was not full of faith. I was rather full of doubt, very much like an atheist, did not believe in anything. I think as a child, I just was unforgiving, cold, sometimes hyper and happy, full of trauma. I don't remember hating God, but I remember not really thinking much of God, not thinking much of Jesus, really. He was just a picture. And so I'm going to spend 3 minutes kind of going on about this before I get into the next one, because we went over my birth and my childhood, and then we'll get into my childhood when living with my adoptive family. But losing my mother was very devastating. I went to her funeral, and it was an open casket. So you can imagine a little 7-year-old losing her mother when I was like the last person she had, because my father spent much time in jail. He was always committing crimes. He was always getting high, getting drunk, fighting, knocking. He just basically was a very violent person that was in prison a lot. And so the social worker came to my foster home, told me my mother had died. I didn't really know how to take it. Then as a child, after I went to the funeral, we had to get in and out of there because I wasn't supposed to see my family. And after the funeral, I was very hyper. I didn't really know how to handle it. So I was just like a playful child. I guess it was the way of dealing with my mother's death. And I didn't really understand what happened. I just understood what they told me, that she had died. She had done bad things. She had done drugs. However you talk to a child. I don't know what happened after that, but it was hard. The last time I talked to my mother, I was being selfish and wanting this and that. I wasn't very appreciative of my mother. I wasn't the average child. Hold on, I'm going to pause this because of the siren. Alright, sorry, there are loud sirens in New Haven. Next video we'll talk about my conversion, and how Jesus touched my life. I only had my foster family after that, and also my foster family, it was questionable. So I grew up really rough. And so this is part 1 of my testimony from my birth to my childhood, and then after Jesus changed my life. So stick around for the next video.